What's up, y'all? Before I get started, I want to say thank you for the continued support. Our first ever crowdfund launched the other day. Actually was a stealth drop, and we're almost halfway towards that first goal. So thank you so much for the support. Head over to ripperverse.com or ripperworks.com if you want more information on that. But I have a hot take here. Okay. There's a lot of discussions happening right now with the deal with Netflix and Warner Bros. A lot of people are attempting to derail it. The industry looks at it as this would be the final nail in the coffin, so they have their own interests. You have those that are looking at it from other perspectives as well of culture. And if we just set aside the legal aspect of it all, just for the sake of this conversation, let's set that aside. Let's assume that for the sake of the conversation, it can happen, okay? Legality aside. The people that worry, for example, with the culture saying that now Netflix, the streamer, maybe they have conflicting ideological views and they now have control of these properties that have been around for ages, longer than many of you have been alive, longer than many of your parents have been alive, and we just can't have that happen. And the others that are looking at it from the perspective that this is not good for the industry, we have to save the cinema and the theatrical releases for the sake of nostalgia and tradition and all these other things. And to that I say, so what? Let's assume that they did have this go through. My argument on this has been very, very consistent. Okay, and I say this as someone that is an entertainer. I also say it as someone that has been in my own actions as how I run my company, a big proponent of physical media. Okay, I'm not a big fan of things going digital. Okay, as they have been over the last years, I'm not, and I've shown you that. And still, I'm even saying, so what? Mainly because this is my argument. Why on earth has America or the West, let's just say the West, because we can look at Hollywood, but more this is just a Western issue, okay? Let's say the West. We hit this stop gap like a wall creatively, probably going into the 2000s, and I don't really understand it. The fact that folks fear that, well, they'd have control of all these other properties. Look at what they can do. We've already seen so many properties get bastardized by Netflix as well as by Warner anyway. But the difference between our generations and the ones that predate us is that they were creating. That's why they became cultural phenoms, is that they just created new things, new entrepreneurs, new creators, new teams, studios came by. And I'm not saying that everything needs to be this massive blockbuster, but it can be respectful and like get support in its own right. There's nothing wrong with that. Why does it always have to be tied to the nostalgia? Everything else moves on, but for some reason we have to keep it like this old broken archaic model that is the cinema experience anyway. And I'm not saying that the model itself needs to go. I want to be clear on that. I think that a lot of people need to understand that we've already raised this generation of people that are now adults, these Gen Zers, who that wasn't their go-to experience like it was when we were coming up, going to the cinema on a Saturday, not even knowing what you're going to see, just looking at what's on the deal and saying, all right, we'll go check that out. And that was about it. And that was a thing. That was a gathering. It was something that you did with your family and your friends. That's not really a thing that happens. Everything that we see success now, definitely in the big blockbuster sense, is for the most part a blip, or it's tied to an already existing property. Okay, it has been around for a little bit. I believe Zootopia is kind of more of even more of an outlier because of how relatively new that property is, and of course how good it's doing internationally, right? But that's not. We all know, and that's why they're so protective, Hollywood, right now, of this deal not going through, because they understand that the only way that they can continue to get paid in the way that they get paid by the millions is in propping up these studios and propping up this this sort of release system even though it's on the decline. So you have the blip, and then on the other hand, you'll have the worst October in 25 years. And that's because if you go by ticket sales, because inflation is actually helping these guys out. Because you look at the box office and you're like, oh, something hit $500,000 or above. $500,000 ain't even $500,000. Or it's not half a million, excuse me, $500 million is not a $500 million 5 years ago. If you go on by ticket sales, everything's down. That's just the way that things are right now. But still, I do believe that there's a place for the cinema stuff. I just think that it's going to be a little more artesian, maybe a little more niche. And maybe the theaters themselves are going to have to sell people on the experience, right? And these studios are going to have to get these budgets under control. Maybe these guys aren't going to be making several tens of millions of dollars as far as these superstars. The superstar isn't even a thing anymore. But seriously, from the creative aspect, people are afraid of now you have Netflix maybe in control of one of these, like as if that prevents everybody else from creating. It does not. This is the one thing that I don't envy of the Japanese, but the Japanese, at least at minimum, are a working example of these guys who will create these. Oh, it's not just Japan, it's South Koreans as well. Even the Chinese in some case. Well, they're creating these properties that didn't exist any before. Yeah, they may have, they've like shonen stuff. A lot of that stuff is very similar. But you look at like Demon Slayer and Jujutsu Kaisen, and right now they got this whole K-pop Demon Hunters thing, and all of these various properties, Solo Leveling and everything. These are properties that were created within the last 10 years, for the most part. So they can keep churning this stuff out. It will be the equivalent of the Japanese only relying on Astro Boy to hold up the entire industry. And that's not what they do. Yes, Dragon Ball is massive and international and arguably the most popular sort of anime and manga franchise of all time as far as the international sense is concerned. That may be true. And One Piece is up there as well. And those have been around for a very long time. But you look at all those other properties and that are relatively new, and we're not sitting here like, well, if those guys don't sell, the big dogs don't sell, or this company has control of them, it's all over. Why did we stop creating? And I'm asking that question more metaphorically to really say, or not metaphorically, rhetorically, excuse me, to really just say and emphasize the fact that there is nothing inherently incorrect about that. If anything, it should light a fire under all these creators as well as the supporters of those creators, especially those of you that have been mindful of the quote unquote culture war and where things are at. You should have known long before now that there should have been an incentive to get out there and create new things that are backed by a more like modern economic model, and as well as owned by a bunch of hacks that despise, I don't know, half the voting population just because they didn't support the guy that they believe that they should support. That's all stuff that's going to need to happen from a creative standpoint. If we're going to move to the future towards a better, more prosperous, like creative industry anyway, it's not going to rest on Warner or Netflix or any of these guys. So let's assume that it did go through and they do end up having control. And let's say they keep the theatrical releases limited and therefore it's just streaming. So what? Why can't we not create new properties? If you're worried about the physical media, why can't we create new properties that get followings, that we create physical media based on those properties? And sure, they might not be multi-billion-dollar properties, but they can be very, very successful. I own $1 million property of myself, of my own. It can happen. It can be done. Why are we sitting here relying on these dinosaurs? It's something that I understand the cultural influence that they have. What I don't understand is those that recognize how dangerous it is when these types of folks control it, don't understand the answer, rather, to combating that is not begging for it to be broken up or begging for the right guy, hoping and wishing that the right guy gives you more so pats on the head and acknowledge you as customers. It's just create the better tomorrow like your grandfathers did.